Start this recording and I'm going to send out, looks like oh God, that wasn't what I needed to do. I have to stay here. All right, cool.
Are you good? And welcome to How to Not Suck at Storytelling. This is how you begin. False start like every single game. Uh, but no, just let me know when I can actually start speaking. Then
You're good to go.
All right. So to those of you who are here, thank you. Welcome to coming. This is How to Not Suck at Storytelling. This is a panel that I typically do at conventions around the country when I go, and figured it might make sense to try it on Discord because there are a lot of you that I never get to see at panels because, well, we all live over the country. So, what this panel got started from is me writing for Geek and Sundry and Nerdist for about 4 years on the GM Timp series that started off originally with Matt Mercer, and then it sort of continued on through various avenues. And I did a bunch of blog post writing for years on this stuff. And I started going around to conventions, and we found out that sitting in an audience and listening to some people say, "Hey, we're great storytellers. This is why we're awesome," was not that engaging. It's way more fun to hear about how we have meteorically failed and almost been lynched by players and our worst mistakes and what we learned from them and what we've been doing with them. Throughout this hour-long conversation, I'm going to talk about some theories about encounter design, ways to make encounters pretty dynamic. I'm going to share some stories about failures, and I'm also going to randomly call upon other storytellers in this like audience group to come up on stage and tell their tales of how they have messed up. And then we're going to kind of workshop through some of those elements with them. Now, before we kind of dive down into the deep end of their stories of personal failure, there's sort of four avenues of storytelling that we do typically find ourselves congregating into, right? You have like player classes. Gamers love to sort themselves in neat little boxes like Hogwarts houses or whatever, and we do the same thing as storytellers. But the four types that I've run into on a consistent basis are narrative storytellers. If you're a narrative storyteller, if you tend to buy a campaign book, or you have a storyline that you want to tell that is like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you're following along on a set path. Uh, there's some people that look down upon narrative storytellers because they're just kind of moving along with a preset module, but honestly it works just fine. And you know what, they have completely riveting plot lines to tell. You know that you're a narrative storyteller if you are really picking up campaign modules and books and eating them and like just loving what is in there for content. Uplifting storytellers is the next one. Uplifting storytellers tend to be people that are focused entirely on the player characters. When your storyteller asks you to come to the table with a 3-page backstory, a soundtrack, some video, playlists, you might have an uplifting storyteller on your hand. The plot for them and the game that they're going to run is entirely based off the actions and backstories that their characters make set within a sandbox world. Now, obviously, you could probably tell that there's a quick, easy way to merge narrative and uplifting, and it's the same with all of these. You're going to find that storytellers can mix and match parts of them, but uplifting storytellers really do tend to focus entirely upon the player's backstory, and game systems that tend to sort that really well tend to be like White Wolf. Legend of the Five Rings tends to be another good one for it because the characters have something that is more about them rather than a linear plot line that keeps it going. Then third one that I see a lot of, which is the category that I tend to fall most into, is an obstructionist storyteller. And I know that obstructionist seems like, oh, I'm going to put like pathways and blocks and everything in front of people. And I admit it probably doesn't have the best name to it. But really, what it's trying to say is it's more like an awesome blossom of consequences. You put forth consequences in front of your players, whether those consequences be good or bad for your party, they're going to happen. And once players take one action, they get some consequences. That's going to lead to some other actions, which are going to lead to more consequences. And you kind of just follow your party around in a sandbox, dropping down consequences. Again, good or bad consequences. And someday you might look up and realize my plot line is way over here, but everybody's had a really good time getting there. And then the fourth style of storyteller, which if you've ever played a live action role playing game, you probably have run into an experimental storyteller. Experimental storytellers will like to mix and match out of game elements and in game styles in order to create something unique at the table. If your storyteller's ever had a pizza delivery driver show up at your house as an NPC and randomly give you a quest in the middle of your tabletop session, then you have run into a experimental storyteller. Uh, Now, these different types of storytelling all have strengths and positives, and all can work together. But usually, when we see people absolutely fail at storytelling, it's when the player group has a mismatched set of expectations with the type of storyteller that is there at the table. If you are somebody who's looking for a great classic dungeon crawl from, playing an old Gygaxian D&D game, you're probably going to want to line up to a narrative storyteller and play, Temple of Elemental Evil. And if you sit down at the table and your storyteller isn't even using the rules, is tossing a Jenga tower around the middle of the table, and people are dressed up in character and they're having experimental feel to the game, you're not going to be having a good time, and you're going to think that that experiment sucks. If you're a storyteller, conversely, and you sit on down with your element and you didn't talk to your players, um, you might run into that clash. Now, how one of these clashes came up, and before I talk about encounter design or grab somebody, and yes, Jeff, get back to the writing because like we only have like one chapter left. So anyway, the how we one of the stories of failures that I have for storytelling is a LARP that I ran. So about 5 years ago, I was still running vampire LARPs that would gear up into the 100 to 200 people range. And we had this game set in a completely custom White Wolf setting where Gehenna had already happened, right? Where it's already in the apocalypse, the masquerade is completely shattered, vampires are out in the public everywhere, and LARPs had kind of evolved to be very tedious and boring in most of the other communities. Everything had kind of gone, it's the same old kill the prince. How many different organization LARPs can you go to? Play some rock, paper, scissors, get your celerity up to fleetness, and kill the prince, rinse and repeat that cycle every 2, 3 weeks. Games had become kind of stale. So we wanted to do something different. I rented out the back of a bar out here in Chicago, and we crammed about 100 people into here. And the idea was that we would play once every 2 weeks for 10 weeks straight. We all knew that when we started this game session, there was a 10-week long chronicle that we would run. And in between those sessions, there would be like downtime activities. Everybody who came to the table to play this game got to play somebody who was a politician or leader of their chosen political faction. And they had elders, Methuselahs, influence, people backing them up. They had custom backgrounds. Honestly, I think I spent about 3.5 months writing plotline just based off characters' backstories to tie this interconnected woven web. It was a closed LARP, which meant that after the LARP had begun, no people would be allowed to attend. Right? You were either in the game or you kind of missed out. You'd have to wait for the next one. And the reason why is the storyline was very, very interconnected with what all the backstories that people had at the table. And the first 8 weeks, this game went fantastic. I mean, this was like vicious Model UN vampire politics. They were coming together in this bar, and we had, like I said, rented this entire place out. And there was even a special private back room where the moderator, who was played by me, was this person who was writing this big giant blood contract based off the conclave that the elders and politicians had all agreed to. And so every game session, we would go in there for a period of 1 hour and 30 minutes, and they would vote and pass like resolutions saying, like, this kingdom or clan of vampires will do X thing in exchange for this ability in the world. Because they had to cope with the fact that Gehenna has now happened. and they were trying to find a way to navigate forward. And everything that they had written or agreed upon was bound by blood magic and manifested throughout the world. And so players started picking up very quickly that their political and social actions would have very, very far reaching consequences. Now, most players, they never really bothered to check the moderator, right? Whether or not his agenda was legitimate or not. Spoiler, he wasn't. This NPC that I was portraying was, in fact, the actual main villain of the entire campaign. But, players were really concerned with murdering each other more so than the moderator, which is great for me. I loved that part. Um, but week 8, everybody is super invested. Like games are happening every 2 weeks. We are doing downtime sessions during the midweeks. Everybody is like thoroughly hooked. Costumes have gone to the nines over this, sort of, I guess, 16-week period at this point. People first week showed up in their vampire trench coats. By week 16, the Zamisi elder is walking into the room on the shoulders of two people, like dressed up and all like flesh carved and things like that. So the game really accelerated in perhaps the most awesome of ways. But then my brilliant naive dumbass decides to make one of the worst mistakes in storytelling history that I've ever had to do. And to this day, it's why I'm petrified of running a very specific type of sequence. On week 9, I decided that I was going to run the game session. And since the players have not really gotten involved with the moderator yet, I was going to tell everybody, hey guys, the moderator is dropping his plans. This is the final week of the game session. Where there's no need for a week 10. And everybody took this final game session and they put down all of the chips. Everybody who killed somebody was like, diabolizing one another. All the secret backstabbings were coming out, all the secret betrayals, all the votes, the last minute like iterations, all the special powers that people had on their cards. Honestly, it was a fantastic game session. Very, very vicious. You don't want to put a room full of vampire players together, of about 70 of them, all dressed up with special powers that can screw each other over by the written letter of a law and a contract. And you want to see how grammar Nazi people can be over somebody's handwriting with a quill ink on a contract of metaphysical blood. But at the end of that night, I revealed that the moderator was a member of Clan Bali and had put everybody to sleep at the beginning of the night when the door closed and they walked into the chamber. And everything that happened that night was a dream. Everybody wakes up and they know that they have one more week left. And now they know what everyone's agendas are going to be. I thought everybody would enjoy getting the frontline seat of the villain's plan. I didn't realize that I had inadvertently stripped about 70 players of their player agency. And I was about ready to get completely skewered by a handful of angry mobbed players to make everything right, because all of their plans, their agendas, that they felt the night didn't matter to them. They were right and proper pissed. I had a very, very expensive bar tab that I had to end up buying in order to make that game session right. To this day, I'll never forget my $1,800 vampire live action bar tab, and I will never run a dream sequence again. What had happened was is I had kind of taken my players from an experimental LARP that they were currently in, and I actually went ahead and I pulled some hardcore rules from the book that said this thing is mechanically possible without actually taking into consideration my player's agency. And it took till about week 13. I had to extend the game about 3 more weeks in order to rectify it to get everybody's like back up to being happy. The game still ended really well on a positive note. But to this day, and ever since that day, I have never run a dream sequence in my life ever again. Probably never will. Path of Morpheus is dead to me, and that's an example of one of like the biggest mistakes that I've made, where something innocent that I thought was a great idea just completely blew up in my face. how did I get them to not kill me? Yeah, that's it's basically that. 3 paychecks of liquor at that time. Um, they had these great fish bowls at the place, so I mean, you could literally get a fish bowl of Long Island iced teas. A lot of people had those that night. Me particularly. It was a 5 o'clock in the morning. Um, but so that being said, normally in the panel at this point is when I would invite somebody else up here to tell a story about how they sucked before I go into encounter design. Um, and I'm not going to grab somebody else yet because somebody is already up on stage, sitting there with his ass on fire. Um, so, Mr. John, Mr. Biscuits, you're up here. Um, now, what is a time where you have done something where you have meteorically pissed off your play group, um, or completely ruined a game?
Oh Lord. There's so many times. I have made mistake after mistake. I don't think I've ever actually truly made a party mad, or players for that matter. Um, I did inadvertently create a rage quit situation for myself where I had to take a hiatus. And it literally was 10 years of I'm not messing with this game. I'm not running this game. I'm not doing anything with this game for 10 years until I picked it back up when, hell, shortly before Red Opera came out. Um,
Okay.
I
So what the hell did you do? This is the story that we need to hear now.
So this is the problem that I ran into with not doing a lot of prep work, and not having a module to kind of fall back on. I was kind of just I had this loose idea in my head, like I've got this main kind of antagonist villain, not really the villain, um, sort of NPC that I created that was solely designed to be like a an ally slash antagonist. Like you've all been captured, and in order to earn your freedom, you have to do services. That's kind of how it all started. They all got brought together. They didn't know each other. It was you meet on a plane you've never been on before. I decided to skip the whole tavern sequence. However, I didn't. This okay. So I'm going to go ahead and preface this with that we were playing 3.5 D&D. So you get the gist of how absolutely broken that could be. Now, one of my friends was like, I'm playing this character. I would like to have access to this and this because my story would permit it. And I was like, okay, cool. So,
Yeah, you could play with the 3.0, Fighter's Handbook and the 3.5 Fighter's Expanded Complete Warrior book.
yeah. Um, he had gotten access to the quintessential drow, among other
Okay.
things. So there was a lot of things in that. I believe it was that book that had different poisons and things that were unique to the Underdark. Now, his story, very complete, very fantastic in the background, but I did not take into account some of those poisons. And then when I made this NPC, I didn't adjust for just how incredibly rude and mean players can be just to spite the DM for fun. And that was unfortunately my first run in with like a toxic player. Um, Within 20 minutes of starting this campaign, I had this NPC going, "Yes, you will work for me," and they're like, "Yeah, yeah, fine, fine, that's fine." I was like, "But you need to prove yourself," and he summons this elemental, this earth elemental, for them to show their skills against. And that player had a poison on him. That thank you, quintessential Drow, for having a DC of 99 Constitution save, and stuck the guy that summoned the elemental, thus ending the entire campaign in 20 minutes. I literally looked at them and said, "I'm done. You're all jerks. I hate you. I'm done." And I literally did not play D&D for 10 years, or I didn't run D&D. I think I played for a few more games, but then I got into Vampire and LARP, and that was much more fun for me for some reason. But yeah, 10 straight years of no D&D until 5th edition came out, and I was like, oh, this is fun. A little bit easier, a little bit more fun. And by that time, I had a lot more in terms of storytelling and creating and things along those lines, where I kind of picked up where I left off and learned a lot from my mistakes of just being honestly, a bad GM.
Because I was going to say, from an element here, there's no mismatch of type of, I guess with some communication, if you wanted to run a uplifting story about your characters' backgrounds, because you had your PCs sit on down, they're able to have custom builds, drow things, elements like that, you might have wanted to run a story based off their backstory. Maybe you had your own thing planned, but a single NPC dying should never be the end of your campaign.
Yeah,
And you should never have a plot line hinging upon a single thing. There's this old like trope that's out there about, you have this entire campaign all based around the heroes assembling and picking up the 5 rings of power, which, once the heroes get these magical items, the great evil is unleashed upon the world, and those characters go on along in a magical quest to be able to put back forth the great evil that, was summoned, and the world will be saved, yada, yada, yada. And the party looks at the storyteller and goes, great, we refuse the rings. Well, if we don't take the rings, there's no great evil. So ergo, we're not going to take the rings. You have no campaign. The storyline falls apart because there is an if then. And so that's one of the things to watch out for, which is actually a great segue to talk about encounter design, because one of the things that a lot of new storytellers struggle with is that skill of improv. What do you do? Right? Because your players are going to do something that is completely out of left field all the time. And I mean, trust us, as writers of RPG campaign books, the hardest thing to do is to write a campaign book that is allowing you to have homebrew flexibility for your custom table, and then also like still provide you with guidance. And the way that I've found that works to devolve into is to talk about the themes of an encounter on a high level for the storytellers. This way, even if all the pretty words that we put in there for the actual encounters and the DCs get completely thrown out the window by player actions, you still have the theme of the encounter, and you know where to gravitate your storytelling to. But let's take a quick level 1 encounter real quick, and we're going to make it hella fun and fast. So I've all probably played D&D or any game with goblins, right? We know that at level 1 party adventurers in 5th edition, a killing fight of 5 to 6 goblins is a pretty generic first level encounter. You do it a few times and you'll magically get your way up to level 2, right? But killing 5 goblins in a woods does not make for a dynamic encounter. In fact, if somebody said, "Hey, Rick, want to come over and play D&D? I want to, go kill goblins in the woods," I probably wouldn't go. It's not an interesting hook for a campaign. So let's take this encounter. We still have 5 goblins in the woods. Now let's put the goblins on a cart, right? The cart is moving towards a village. Okay? So there's something a little bit more dynamic. You can make it chasing more of it. Again, it's still 5 goblins on a cart. That cart's now moving, though. Now let's make it a little bit more chaotic. Take away any horses from the cart. The cart is now careening towards a village. We need to add some stakes to this. The players are going to be on another cart, and that village happens to now be their starting village or hometown. Again, 5 goblins crashing into a fruit stand, can be fun, has some elements to it, but let's add a little bit more to it. The goblins have nothing but TNT on their cart, and it is, ready to explode. Now, here's where you can have some social encounters. You can make it so that the goblins don't want to be on the cart. So rather than you having to kill the goblins are actually trying to put out the flaming like wicks of TNT and other Greek fire elements that are there, and trying to get off. And the players might even have a social encounter on a moving cart, trying to rescue or convince and communicate in a different language to show the goblins what they need to do. Or you could keep it as a combat encounter, and the goblins are actually trying to like go blow things up. Um, Add even further stakes into this. One of the characters that happened to write a backstory for your first game session, because there's always that like two players that never turn one in, and then there's the one player who came with like the 18-page long backstory. Somebody from that 18-page backstory needs to show up in the middle of the road, that is like their little sister or like their pet, right? Like if somebody has a small cute owl bear pet or an animal companion, you put that right in the middle of the road. All right. The furrier and cuter it is, or the smaller and more adorable it is, the better your chances are here at your party. Now you have your cart of 5 goblins careening down, loaded with TNT, who can't speak a language that may or may not be evil, and the party is not sure which way it's going to go, towards a village that is their starting village. Now here's the beauty of it. You don't write whether the players succeed or fail at this encounter. You, as a storyteller, jot down at the start of your game session, you write down 3 separate pathways. What happens if they succeed? What happens if they fail? What happens if they do nothing? And that's like the secret sauce for having dynamic encounters in an obstructionist GM way. You always have a plan for what happens if the players do nothing. You have a plan for what happens if they pass and what happens if they fail. Because this cart could have exploded. They could have lost their cute owl bear named Coco. Uh, the goblins could all be dead. Half the players could be dead from a TNT explosion. And their characters could not even be the characters that were on the cart. Their characters could have been the ones who were called to the town to like investigate things, and it could have just been an opening scene. You could spin failure into uh, the most fantastic campaigns, which is, arguably my shameless plug for like why the Black Ballad is such like a good hook, because death turns into like some really awesome things. Um, but even if it's a social encounter where the goblins were stuck there and they didn't want to be on that cart, now you have a really cool investigative encounter for why did they get there? What's the backstory? What was the purpose of them being there? And also, who has a really cute owl bear named Coco and didn't share that with the rest of the party? Is about another good 2 hours of game session roleplay, and you have now created an anchor point for your entire group. So that's an example of uh, how you could take a basic encounter and by simply adding in a focus, some elements of dynamic movement, some consequences, and some stakes. The same challenge rating encounter has become vastly more dynamic. And anytime you see a book that has a campaign already written in it, usually from Wizards of the Coast, you could take every one of their encounters in there and you can spice them up by applying these elements to them. A lot of the encounters that are out there are just very sandbox dry. Here's your CR5 encounter, go whack, sticks, kill. Here's a map layout, some basic stuff like that. So you take them and you house rule them, and that will make your narrative games so much better. All right. So before I continue with tales of failure and woe, I'm going to grab somebody else to hop on stage and talk about a thing. So I have 2 Michaels here. The Eldritch author or Michael OJ? Which one of you guys want to go first? Eldritch author, you're quick on the draw. All right, hop on stage, sir.
I think I clicked the right button. There we go.
Hello,
You
hello,
did.
hello.
Hello.
How is everybody?
I'm doing fantastic. Nice to see you on here.
Good to be here.
So, now, first, for people who don't know you, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm the Eldritch Author, aka Michelangelo. That's my IRL name. It's also how I write myself as an author. I am known for being on social media as the creator of a Dark Carnival universe with a fandom tied to it. Creator of the Dark Ringmaster and everything that implies. Very big on writing and helping people write compelling villain characters. as well as
Yep.
just entertaining people with funnies or evil stuff.
Evil stuff, maybe. So you you have played in a significant amount of other games beyond just Dungeons and Dragons as well. From like we've talked, you've dabbled in vampires and other things, right?
No, I have dabbled in the lore of them. I started playing TTRPGs around 3.5, around when the complete series was being released. So like when I was like 12 or 13, somewhere around there. I'm only 34.
Hey,
And
we're all in the same like
right, right.
bracket at the moment up
So it's
here.
so there was also, yeah, nice to see you guys. There was a long stint of time where like I wasn't playing at all, and then fifth edition came out, and I remember I remember playing some fourth edition, and I remember not liking it a lot because like just the way it was by itself didn't allow for a lot of storytelling. But I know that it is also like fun for a lot of other people of different playing styles. I have never gotten the chance to play White Wolf, Vampire the Masquerade, or anything of that sort, simply from lack of time and playgroup too. So I am like predominantly familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, the settings they're in, the lore they're in. Um, I would need to refamiliarize myself with 3.5, and I've never gotten into Pathfinder either. Um, but like when it does come to D&D, like I am super big into it, like to the point where like I could tell you like different lore bits and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, come on. There's not that many people that I could throw a random writing assignment to write spells, and somebody just actually be like, "Nope, here's the entire format of everything that the way that they're supposed to be, all already done." Um,
Oh yeah,
you know. So
that comes from
that being
years of experience homebrewing and playing the game.
that being said, how did you suck at storytelling?
All right, so I am what one would refer to as neurospicy, specifically of the autistic variety. And at, with that, there came an initial challenge in my writing where I struggled immensely with pacing. Like, to the degree that I would world build, right? Because I'm huge into homebrew. I don't think in 5e I've ever run a module as a storyteller. However, I thrived in the homebrewing aspect of it to the point where like I would make a world and I would make these cities and towns and settings and characters and all of that. There were two big sins I committed in the same homebrew world with the same play group. The first one was so glaring we had to retcon the first session, where I had gotten so excited for the reveal, essentially the apocalypse scenario, that I incidentally started the apocalypse like session one of like what was supposed to be a drawn out series. Now this was 7 years ago. This was when I first started DMing for 5e, and it was because it was so tantalizing and I was so excited. I essentially made like my own version of Phyrexians from Magic the Gathering, and just it it got so jarring for the players because like they had no reason to care about the world that was about to fall apart. Like that was really what like made it terrible. So we ended up having to retcon it completely. Um Not so much that we had to make it a dream, but like be like, all right, listen, I got to come back to this, and we're gonna start from scratch. And so we did,
You did
and
an
we had a
owl
great
bear
time.
named Koku. So
Pretty much, and that was something that I realized is like I get so excited for my world and just to tell the story that like I would jump the gun. Another very big sin that I committed that like the players didn't notice, but in the aftermath I noticed, um, was essentially like giving them too many cutscenes, moments where like they were bystanders or observers for the story that was being told, where there was NPCs that were like completely out of their league, allied NPCs, they weren't even antagonistic, interacting with the world where like honestly they could have been interacting instead. like it didn't need to be this scenario where they're watching an NPC do the heroics. To the players, it seemed like, oh, this is something that we're going to aspire to be. But as a writer, I realized, holy crap, wait a minute, I have no plans for like how this would play out into the story other than this is just a cool moment to watch. And that really sat with me. And I realized that like in order for them to get like, I don't need to throw these amazing like NPCs of high, like basically I fell for the every tavern keep is a legendary hero syndrome, right? Where
Well, it's yeah,
Mhm,
definitely right into that. You're
mhm,
a narrative storyteller by proxy, right? You have a
mhm.
storyline that you want to tell. You have built your world, your books. You have your epic moments. You should have just written a novel, because
Right.
at this
No,
point
no,
you
no,
don't have to
it
worry
really
about play
was that.
interaction.
Yeah, it really was that. It really was. I fell into them playing playing what should have been a novel, right? Like they were still having fun. Like I did not get any complaints other than that first sin right there. But after that, like they were having a blast. They were enjoying the NPCs. I at least had personalities for these NPCs to make up for the fact that like I was railroading these cutscenes essentially. Um Borderline uninterruptible. And I at least when I realized what I did, I made it so like I tried everything I could and succeeded giving those players more agency moving forward. But it was definitely something that fortunately I learned not the hard way because they still enjoyed the flavors, the characters, the what was happening before them. They were still entertained. So, but in other play groups, I don't think that would have flied like at all.
No, especially because if you are there with friends who are going to like you and they're going to let go of some of your sins, they're just happy to be able to play and
Yeah.
roll some dice. But
Mhm.
I've been to conventions with professional storytellers, sat there and just talked to me for 4 hours, and I
Mhm.
was like, cool. That was story time. Should I have my juice box and my carpet square? Um, and
Right.
you want to see me go into like, because I can flip in a heartbeat. I could go into like power
Mhm.
gamey vampire player mode and be like, I can murder this entire game. Let's go. I've
Mhm.
been honed in the battles of very, very hard, vicious live action role play games that there's
Mhm.
different mindsets of players. Um, uh, uh, D&D on hard mode was always a fun event at Gen Con, which was basically just you versus the GM.
Right.
And you could do some stuff with that. But no, this narrative storytelling is a thing, and it is a common mistake that you hear a lot. I mean, in a convention right now, like if we were at Kineticon and I was able to ask for a show of hands,
Mhm.
how many people have ever played with a storyteller that either had their significant other or a favorite NPC that was along for the ride that tended to do most of the work? Um,
Yeah.
and that is a time and time true like trope that exists for a reason, because the storyteller often feels that they themselves need to play the game, right? And so you have these moments of these stories that you are going to interject because they are your moments of self gratification. um, and this is where, if you're it's a weird blend, because if you're narrative, you have a plot line and your satisfaction is going to come from seeing that plot line to its end. If you're obstructionist, you want a chance to play and have your favorite NPC do a thing to cause consequences that you want to see for your players. Shouldn't
Mhm.
work that way. Your players should cause their own consequences. But both of these styles are ignoring an uplifting play group. And if your play group actually cared about leveling up their characters, their own player agency, and their own personal stories, you would have might have had a rage quit scenario on your hand, or a gaming group fall apart very, very quickly, because that same story is told time and time again of so and so's just got a favorite NPC paladin who runs around and saves everything, and like, the party's supposed to care about it, and they get all these bonus things, and then it causes intergroup drama, especially if it's somebody else's significant other. And it's just a tale that we've heard a lot. But
Yeah.
sounds like you overcame it through the natural way when nobody noticed it. You caught
Mhm.
it yourself and were like, hey, I bet you my players would really like to do this. And you just made some minor edits. The first retcon doesn't count. That's just called a false start, man. We all have those games
Oh
of
no,
like,
yeah,
eh.
that was exactly what it is. It was a false start, and like I owned up to it immediately. And again, like I mean, I don't know how common it is necessarily for people to play with strangers. Like I only because like I've only ever played with either friends or in the present day fans who paid me to storytell for them, right? Um, Speaking of which, two things on that. One, the one thing that I wrote, I kept in the forefront of my mind after that campaign was I realized any sin or mistake I could make as a storyteller in a TTRPG of any kind, I realized I am not the only one who has made that mistake, and that is like so reassuring. And there are people on the internet or people that we know who have made the same mistakes and chances are have learned from it. So like I'm not going to sit here and say like I learned by myself these mistakes. No, like I actually did get some feedback from other storytellers who were like, "Oh no, I've done the same thing. This is how I rectified it or how I remedied it," right? And it actually did develop into one of my strongest suits when it comes to storytelling, specifically in the homebrew world. The one thing that both of those mistakes, those, moments of sucking at storytelling that I took for granted and improved upon the most was the player's ability to care about the world that their characters are in. Um, so actually, this just happened. Like today, like just before this panel, right? I was with my Tuesday play group. Wonderful players from the UK. Just amazing people, right? And they are on a plot hook, right? On a quest hook where, like, they need to reforge this blade that was on one of the players who's an amnesiac. They actually have an NPC with them that's just along for the ride. However, he is very much in the background. He's an amnesiac. He doesn't remember anything. Like, there's like some skills that he has that comes up, but like, I always make sure the players are doing all of the hard work. They are doing all the heavy lifting. The only reason why he's there is because the players found him imprisoned, took a shining to him, and want to help him get his memories back, which may or may not benefit them in the future. We'll see. So they end up going into what seemed like an abandoned dwarven city, which is essentially my version of a dungeon. There's a lot of history there. What I do with my homebrew building is whenever there's something that's supposed to be a dungeon or something that's not heavily populated, why is it there? What is the history behind it? This city has been empty or has been abandoned for 50 years. Why? And that's when I started having the environment tell the story. When the players looked into the houses in this underground dwarven city, they asked like, what's in there? What's inside these like houses? Well, it looks like all the food's gone. All the dishes are gone. All the clothes are gone. Does it look like there was like a struggle? No, there was no struggle. It seems like whoever lived here left of their own accord. Adds to the layer of mystery. They get deeper into this dwarven city. They find that all of the forges have been turned into factories that are run by skeleton dwarves that get very violent when you talk to them in dwarvish. Well, why are these undead dwarves violent against dwarves? More layer to the mystery that the players need to figure out. They go even further down into the mining tunnel, and they just ended with seeing that there's a bunch of these dwarven corpses along the lines that have like along the walls that have been dead for decades, and they look like they're just waiting still, like inanimate, waiting. And then they find a dead carrion crawler or like one of those underground monsters, and that's been freshly killed. Carrion crawl And one of the players figured out, wait, carrion crawlers eat dead things. Something didn't They figured out on their own, wait, something doesn't want these dwarf corpses to be eaten. Why? Also, that means someone's down here alive. What's going on? And like, just they got so heavily invested into the mystery and the history of this abandoned dwarf city that has not seen anyone come in or out in 5 years. And it's that environmental storytelling that I would strongly recommend for anyone who wants their players to care about the world. Have the world tell the story, not NPCs. I actually try to avoid exposition dumps, but
Yeah, it's
like,
a
and
show
let
don't
them.
tell. It's actually our
Right,
uh
exactly. Um, and that's it. No, and that's exactly it. Like that is there is something rewarding when the players start figuring shit out on their own, and they're starting to piece together like why things are the way they are. And I specifically use that almost exclusively have that focus in terms of dungeons. Like, why is the dungeon, whether or not it's like actually a dungeon,
so
why is this dungeon encounter here?
it's funny is you and I have a
Who
very similar
occupies it?
style.
Mhm,
You and I have a very similar style in storytelling, but so also very,
mhm,
very different. For as much of a
mhm,
writer I am with lores and books and things that I have written,
mhm,
when I'm a storyteller, I'm actually incredibly improv. I let that
mhm,
same thing and that same kind of environmental storyteller take play by describing
mhm,
lighting, scenes, certain elements, and I'm very cautious of Chekhov's gun because there've been a few times where I put like I
mhm.
described like a broken rock that's like half of a heart with somebody's name written on it and the
Yeah.
other half is like broken off and they're like, oh, I'm gonna take this and go find this person. I'm like, I just was describing flavor text. All right, I gotta create a whole love quest now.
Oh, yeah, no,
uh
dude, freaking improv is
uh yeah,
absolutely
but
big,
so
super
i
big.
don't I don't actually write a lot of lore.
Mhm,
Like I know my setting and I know my sandbox, perhaps because I just already know it in my brain. I passively
mhm.
already have it there. um But I'll do the same thing as you, where you let this players investigate and store it, but I will let them have their conspiracy board. And a lot of times, as my players start unraveling their own mysteries, my players are their own worst enemies. And I'm just sitting there taking down notes of the storyteller, like, yep, totally. That's a very, yep, makes good sense. Give me a perception check. Writes in secret background lore based off players' insane conspiracy theory because they're way worse than anything I would have ever actually came up with. At least usually in my head. So because I
Yeah.
ran this game called Eclipse Phase for a really long time. And it's a transhumanist game set in space of conspiracy and horror. And one of the things that we learned in running a space game was that the biggest threat that your players could have when they could reclone their bodies and just reset their memories back to session zero was starting off a game session with you wake up and you have no memory of why you're in a new body with a nicotine addiction, and because they have to now investigate this altered carbon type thing. And their web of conspiracy over the NPCs had started to grow to the point where my players had 6 sheets of whiteboard conspiracy notes. And it got to the point where I had to sneak into my friend's basement so I could snap photos of what they thought was up with the NPCs in my game to be able to write them in. Like, here's these elements that are there because they just did so much more of like brainstorming about them than I had ever intended. Um, my players still don't know that they provided me with an entire 2 years of campaign material, and I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, so just different styles, but same thing.
Mhm.
Environmental storytelling and lore elements let your players and let the setting bring the mystery, and let your players find their own investigations. Because when they do find that, and they want to go off and like start playing around with skeletons, like if you players in your group are like, I'm just going to start taking all the dwarf skeletons, kidnapping them and trying to pull them out and raise my own like angry dwarven necromancer army and just ignoring a plot line, you would have
Mhm.
been able to had a field day with that, you know.
Oh, yeah. And that
um
would be an example of like the players not doing anything or just doing something completely different from what your points were. What do they do if they succeed? What do they do if they fail? And what do they do if they do nothing? That's sort of
I
like
was
an
actually
in
just
between
about
of two of those options.
Yeah, I was just about to say that's a great point of here's these three things. um so before I grab I want to grab one more person up on stage before I tell like my final and like biggest storyteller failure. So who's got a storyteller sin and commit that they want to share? I think it might be the other Michael. All right, other Michael, pop on stage.
You want me to step down?
You can stay up here for now.
Gotcha.
Or if you want to step down, you can. I'm not sure. We're gonna figure out how this works.
You just need to click at the bottom. It says enter stage, I believe. I started up here, so I assume
Yeah.
it says enter stage or leave the stage.
I think for me it said request
Okay.
to be
Yeah.
to be speaker.
Actually, yeah, bounce off stage then this way, because this way it'll show up well nice on OBS with 3 people.
All right, let me see if I can just.
All right. Well, Michael.
There we go.
Aha, there you found your button.
Way longer than I thought it was going to take. I was staring at the chat going, where's the button? And it's like, oh, it's at the bottom of the screen.
Jesus. Hi, Michael. You came out sounding out of left field with your microphone turned all the way up.
Oh, geez, sorry. Is it okay now?
No, you still sound like the voice of like a celestial entity booming down upon mere mortals.
Is this better?
No.
Still no. Got it.
Michael, I am sorry. I cannot have you like speak a reverberated tale of divine failure at this level. We would all die. All right, Crystal. Yes, come talk about skinning bugbears.
I hit a button. I don't know who I hit it for, but we'll figure it out.
I
in a
hope you hit
second.
a button.
Yeah. I clicked the accept. Did I break something? Wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, you did.
Awesome. This is why I can't be trusted with big buttons.
Crystal, request again.
Yeah, so I can click the button for a second. There we go. I have accepted.
So did I.
All right.
And it still didn't work.
No, it did not. Let me check something. No, she's good. Okay. Invite sent.
Nope.
Okay. There we go.
Oh, there she.
There we go.
Okay, Crystal.
Hello.
Once your camera loads, welcome back to How to Not Suck at Storytelling. So, just so everybody knows, Crystal has done this panel with me in person multiple times now, actually. Yes. So, well, Crystal, I don't think that many people know who you are who are here. So, who are you, real quick, and how did you fail at storytelling?
Yeah. So I am a educator. I am also a freelance writer for a whole bunch of RPGs, including Vampire 5th Edition that we've just been talking about, as well as Black Ballad and the Red Opera, and a whole bunch of other things. And I... they were talking about owlbears in the chat, and they are really going to hate me. So, I was storytelling my very, very first 5th edition group, and it was with a whole bunch of my regular gaming friends, including a couple of very first-time role-playing people. And so I wanted to... I'm so sorry, guys. I wanted to kind of give them an introduction to like how to run their sheet, with it being kind of low maintenance for the new people, but also have it be where the newer players or the older players can also kind of get used to 5th edition. So I kind of had like this, WoW style quests where they had to do like chain stuff or go and help out this local town. And one of the things that was happening was that it was coming close to winter, and so the town needed some supplies for this, for their the upcoming winter. And so one of the requests was for them to hunt down owl bears and bring back their pelts, but also their meat and stuff like that, so that they could dry it and have some food for the winter. And I had everything all planned out. But I am also like not one of those GMs that have everything micromanaged in my books. And the time came for me to storytell this part and storytell the combat. And when they ask, or they tell them what the quest is for, I say bugbears, because that's the first thing that comes up in the monster manual, because it's alphabetical order. And so they go and they kill a whole bunch of these bugbears, bring back their skins and the meat and all of that fun stuff. And it isn't until about like 6 months later, where I'm watching Critical Role, and they come into this new area where Matt voices bugbears. And that's when I realized that bugbears are humanoids. And I accidentally turned my entire party into Ed Gein.
To add to this every time I hear this story, I'm like, okay, so you've created an evil party through no volition of their own, but the players went with it, mind you. The players of this group knew full well what a bugbear was.
The older players did, yes. The newer players did not.
Okay. But when I at Gen Con, when all the players are in the audience and they're all like freaking nodding, and they're like, oh yeah, that was us. We had done the thing.
Yep, they totally do.
So this is one of those things that's hard to pin as like a failure of storyteller, because everybody had a good time, right? It was more of a consequence of something that you had done took something and gone off into left field. But it was fine. You were able to bring it back in. You ended up telling like bounty hunters, I think, later on, and you ended up working what you had them do in plot lines later.
Yes. So what ended up happening was that at one point a bounty hunter did come to the town to kind of avenge what had happened to this group of bugbears and their kin, only to realize that the townsfolk also really didn't know anything about this, because storyteller. And so what ended up happening was there was a negotiation that happened between the town and the bugbears, and the bugbears unionized and came with terms to this town for reparations against their own. And so then the players came back into this, and there's more to this story, Rick. So the players came back into this, and the town was like, hey, these guys did this. And so the adventurers, my group, now had to go and essentially make reparations with this bugbear union, and essentially clean their slate. They didn't want to do like an evil campaign or anything like that. They wanted to be somewhat good and lawful. And so I didn't want to go and just kind of run with it that way. And instead they kind of had to clear their palate, so to speak, of that sin. So yeah. The bugbears unionized.
So I think that, like in my head, the way that this would have done is you would have had to resurrect all the bugbears with the dead body parts that you probably still had because you pelted them as part of the reparations.
Yep. Oh, and help to build up their community essentially too. and replace like the missing people within their social links to be able to make stuff and craft things and all of that stuff.
So, but this, the important lesson here in terms of storytelling, right, is even when you do something that is completely unattached, right, you can always make up for it on the back end by taking that knowledge and working in it. Because your players, they don't know what isn't showing to them. So that goes into the thing when Eldritch author Michael writes a massive set of lore and backstory, his players don't know about it until it's on screen. So if it's same with you, your players don't know that the bugbears are unionizing until it's actually put in front of them. So you can save these moments and hide them in the background to go back to something that you think was a mistake that your players might not have caught on to then shine a spotlight on it and have some fun with it later down the line. And that can actually add some brevity and a break to a nice game session. And because now in your campaign, if that campaign was going to continue and something was going to happen to that bugbear union, you've now created an anchor point for emotional investment into your campaign world and storyline because of a series of failures that led to an awesome story.
Absolutely.
Um,
I as a GM like to not redline if I don't have to. I understand it does have to happen, but I do try to work with my mistakes and yeah.
Yeah, I often, I think LARP in general teaches you that you can't really retcon because every time you try to retcon in a live action game, it turns into a 3-hour session of drama.
Yep.
So I have two quick, I have one really quick Discord storytelling nightmare that I want to share with people because we're actually running this on Discord. It's one of the few times I actually get to share this story. And then I'm going to end with my big one and actually where the name Storytellers Forge comes from. And then we might just hang out for a while after. But
Do you want me to
officially
step off?
yeah, we're going to officially close down the panel here at this point. So the Discord story failure. This one is not a story of personal failure that happened to me. It is one that I witnessed. And the what happened in this case is running online proposes all kinds of different things, and there's very few people that I know that might run into this situation. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to take that statement back. Several of the people in this like attendance might actually run into this. Storytelling for strangers is difficult and different. And when you're behind Discord, you don't necessarily need to be on camera, and you can hide behind avatars and do text by roleplay. Play by post or text to post games are a lot of fun. I happen to have run and played in a bunch of them. I actually want to get one started on this server here at some point using the Black Ballad setting. Now, the perils, though, is that it can be very time consuming for a single storyteller. And one storyteller I know got involved in running a Discord game for this sort of homebrew World of Darkness, urban fantasy, sort of mythology type game. And he had 5 players, 6 players that were all playing, and they were very, very active. And he had become friends with all of them. But this game had become an all-consuming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week post for him. He was always just on his phone. He was working conventions on his phone, doing things on his phone, always posting because these people were always posting. There were side scenes, narrations, runs. I mean, it was like a on-demand AI generated of like storyteller that was there for your personal text by post whims with no set boundaries. And the storyteller was starting to lose himself down and all of his other art like endeavors that he was working on by virtue of letting the game get the better of him without having those boundaries placed. This went on for about 2 years. And at this point, that person had actually managed to lost several amount of friends. Never could find or bring other on to be storytellers with them. Was very like over possessive of the play by post world. And what they found out was pretty ground shattering to them. They weren't actually storytelling for 7 different people. They were storytelling for one person who made 7 different accounts and created different Facebook profiles and different Twitter accounts and different internet spoofs, all to pretend to be different people with their own interpersonal relationships in order to play 7 different characters all of the time. So, that being said, that's a thing to watch out for. If you're a storyteller, they are living and breathing people. Um, and even if it's play by post or something like that, make sure you know and have session zeros with your people. Try to hop on voice. Sometimes things can go very differently when you're dealing with anonymity and storytelling. You also don't know what kind of things might put people off when you're storytelling. You're not sure how people are going to react to certain things. I will never invite somebody to a horror session that I run without a session zero, for example. These are just critical elements that also guard your safety and other people's safety. Now, on a lighter or a far darker note, my biggest storytelling success or failure, I'm really still not sure yet on, but I had a store called Fair Game out here in Downers Grove. I had watched one Adventurers League GM with me and my one of my very good friends, Jesse. We sat down at an Adventurers League table. There was a 10-year-old kid at the table, and this storyteller was like, "What are you, an idiot? I already told you the rules." At that point, me and Jesse got up, grabbed the 10-year-old kid, pulled him into his own table, and ran a private game. 2 weeks later, we had 35 kids in the store. We started up a program called Storytellers Forge, and it was arguably a D&D for kids. This store program took kids from ages 8 to 17 and would teach them how to be storytellers through gameplay. So the idea was these kids would come, they would sit at a table, and they would play, and they would like build they were like this dragon Boltius would pick them up from wherever they were in trouble and drop them in the middle of the wilderness. And every game session, they would build out their city. And over a year of gameplay, uh, this program grew to over 200 kids. And these 200 kids had a shared universe that they were creating. Every time they would go on a mission, they would bring back various things. It turns out all the kids wanted to save all the monsters, so they ended up building like a monster city, right? And I was hiring, and we were paying paid GMs. At some point during like all of the trials and tribulations, I think I had like 10 GMs that were getting paid like $35 a game session to run, um, and it was a really fantastic time for both kids that were graduating the program to come back and have a summer job storytelling, and also people being invested in learning how to be storytellers. These kids were having a blast. There were times when their parents would come in and play pirates, and the kids themselves would have the pirates would attack the kids' home village, and the kids would have to narrate for their parents with all the monsters and defenses that they had gotten. Um, and overall, the program was a success. There was two main things though. This was a storyline, and I was writing it. And they had one major ally named Boltius, who was a brass dragon, bit of a bard, bit plucky, bit absent-minded, but arguably a good, chaotic good brass dragon that was taking care of the group to make sure that the game would eventually keep moving forward. And their villain was an archdragon named Gorsnouch, and it was a blue dragon who was actually like the emperor of the Pirate Isles, and like just wanted to actually devour half the monsters that these kids had managed to save. And throughout the entire year-long campaign, there had been hits and elements that Gorsnouch and his generals and his pirates and things like that were gearing up towards a big epic fight. At the end of the campaign, we decided to run a massive store epic. And so we get about 196 kids into this big giant freaking warehouse, all of us storytellers and whatnot. And we run this epic campaign where they're defending their village. And so I am in control of Boltius and Gorsnouch as like the head GM. All of the other GMs are running their individual tables, who are dealing with like pirate captains and monsters and other enemies and arch rivals that they had, made throughout the campaign. And so they're doing the small battle, while every combat turn I'm describing this massive kaiju fight between, these two like very large dragons over their village, and the characters are running around between their feet and things like that. It's freaking awesome. we get to about the halfway point of the encounter. All the other tables have achieved most of their objectives, as it were. So it's time to move the encounter to the next stage of the battle. And so I describe Gorsnotch rip the head off Boltius, toss the carcass to the ground, polymorph and shape change back into a sorcerer with a gleaming metal jaw, and cast Meteor Swarm down on the kingdom that the kids had built. And as Gorsnouch like touches the ground and like starts walking through, walls of fire lighting up every building around him, the store gets quiet as he steps over the body of Boltius. One kid pulls out his phone and plays Ballad of the True Hero from Undertale. I have never seen more kids be more ready to kill a single NPC than in that day. And all of the chatter, all of the phones, the internet, none of that existed. For the next hour and 40 minutes, those kids were dedicated, focused to the slaughter and annihilation of a blue dragon known as Gorsnouch. And they came together like crazy to do that. They are like tossing around scrolls and all these other elements between their tables. They're having full tabletop cooperation. And at the end of it, they're all like talking about it. They're all like happy. Like, did you see what I did? Blah, 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 blah. And they're all like running around and everybody's having pizza. Everything's great. And actually, it ended out great. I thought it was a fantastic session. And we really didn't have any problems until 10 o'clock that night when I hear crying coming from the sound of my room. And I go knock on the door. And for those of you guys that don't know, I happen to have a kid named, I have a young son. At the time, he was much younger when he was playing in this, and he was very, very upset about something. And I was like, hey, what's wrong, kiddo? And he's like, I refuse to talk to me. He'd only text me. And he texts me one word, Boltius. It just took 6 hours for the death of that NPC that they had grown attached to finally set in with their group. And that's when I realized that that bleed factor also might have hit other kids. Sure enough, a ton of kids ended up bawling their eyes out and having bleed happen much, much later. Not knowing that I had the epilogue game session with the start of the next campaign was going to be about, hey, what happens after dragons die? And we were going to go down a whole nother campaign for the next year. I somehow made an entire store of teenagers and 8-year-old kids bawl their eyes out over a year-long campaign by killing their favorite NPCs. But he does live on in their memory. They made T-shirts and fan art and all kinds of stuff for it. But that's actually where the name Storytellers Forge came from. And that was the store program we used to get through COVID at the local gaming stores here in Chicago. To this day, would I change that scene? I don't think I would. When I've had other people talk to me about this panel or heard this story, it actually taught the kids a really important lesson about death and other elements. But it also made me more aware of bleed and that players get really attached to their characters and their NPCs, and that emotion and that emotional attachment is a very, very real thing that it should never be abused or taken advantage by any storyteller. You should always pay attention. It's more than just a sheet of paper. You are building worlds and collective imaginations together, and you're telling something as a collaborative unit. And that's fun. Don't disrespect it. And if you don't disrespect it, you will naturally not suck at storytelling. So this, guys, by the way, is the official end of my panel. I'm going to stick around and hang out and chat, stuff like that. But that's usually how I end my panel because that is actually a story that still gets me to this day. So, yeah, we can hang out now and chat, but I'm officially going to stop recording.
Thank you, Rick. I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop button now.